There are some letters that are never meant to be answered. No reply will ever come. No footsteps will come through the door. No voice will ever say, "I'm home." And yet, every week, one man sat at the same wooden desk, took out a blank sheet of paper, and wrote a letter to the woman he had loved for more than 40 years. She was dead. He knew she was dead. He had held her hand when she took her final breath. He had watched the doctors leave the room. He had returned home alone for the first time in decades. And still, every Sunday morning, he wrote to her. For years, nobody understood why. Some people thought he couldn't accept the truth. Others believed he was trapped in the past. But the real reason he continued writing was far more heartbreaking. Because those letters weren't really about expecting her to come back. They were about keeping a promise. It began on an ordinary autumn morning. The kind of morning that feels completely normal until something happens that divides your life into two parts. Before that moment, and after it, his name was Daniel. He was 68 years old, retired, and living in a quiet little town where most people knew each other. For 43 years, there had been one person at the center of his life. Her name was Margaret. Daniel first met Margaret when they were both young. He was 24, she was 22. They met in a small neighborhood cafe where Daniel worked part-time while trying to build a career. Margaret came in almost every morning. She always ordered the same thing: coffee, no sugar, and a slice of toast. At first, Daniel didn't think much of it. She was simply another customer. But after a few weeks, he began noticing that she always chose the same table near the window. One rainy morning, the cafe was unusually quiet. Daniel placed her coffee on the table. Margaret looked up and smiled. Then she said something that would stay with him for the rest of his life. "You always look happier when it's raining." Daniel laughed. "I think you're the first person who's ever noticed that. I've been watching you for 2 months," she replied. He didn't know what to say. She smiled again. And that was the beginning. Their relationship didn't start with fireworks. There were no dramatic declarations. No movie-like proposal. Just two people slowly discovering that they enjoyed being around each other. They walked home together after work. They talked for hours. They shared dreams they had never told anyone else. Daniel wanted to build a stable life. Margaret wanted a home filled with books, music, and children. A year later, they were married. Their wedding was small. Their families were there. A few close friends. Nothing extravagant. But Daniel remembered one thing more clearly than everything else. When Margaret walked toward him, she looked nervous. He whispered, "Don't worry. I'm nervous too." She laughed. And suddenly, both of them relaxed. Their life together wasn't perfect. They argued. They struggled with money. They worried about their children. They lost people they loved. There were years when everything seemed to go wrong at once. But they stayed. And that was what made their love extraordinary. They stayed. When their first child was born, Daniel cried. When their second child was born, Margaret cried. When the children grew older and left home, they both cried. Eventually, the house became quiet again. Just like it had been before they met. But this time, they had each other. They traveled when they could. They celebrated birthdays. They cooked together. They watched old movies late at night. And every Sunday morning, Margaret made breakfast. Daniel would sit at the kitchen table, reading the newspaper while she moved around the kitchen. Sometimes she would complain that he was reading too loudly. Sometimes he would pretend not to hear her. It was ordinary. Beautifully ordinary. And that was exactly what made losing her so painful. Because one day, ordinary life simply stopped. Margaret had been feeling tired for several weeks. At first, she thought it was stress. Then she blamed her age. Then she finally agreed to see a doctor. The diagnosis changed everything. Cancer. By the time they discovered it, the disease had already spread. Daniel refused to believe it. He searched for doctors. He searched for treatments. He searched for miracles. He drove Margaret to appointments. He sat beside her during chemotherapy. He held her hand when she was too weak to walk. And every night, after she fell asleep, Daniel would sit alone in the kitchen and search the internet for another possibility. Another treatment. Another hospital. Another reason to believe she might survive. But sometimes love cannot change the ending. Margaret became weaker. Her hair fell out. Her voice became softer. The woman who had once filled their house with laughter could barely get out of bed. Still, she tried to make Daniel smile. One evening, while they were sitting together, she looked at him and said, "You're going to be terrible at living alone." Daniel smiled. "I'm not planning to." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "You have to." He didn't answer. She reached for his hand. "Promise me." Daniel squeezed her fingers. "I promise." It was the hardest promise he had ever made. A few weeks later, Margaret's condition became critical. Daniel spent every night beside her. He barely slept. He didn't want to miss anything. One evening, the room was quiet. Margaret opened her eyes. Daniel was sitting beside her. She looked at him and smiled. "Do you remember our first rainy day?" Daniel nodded. "You were working in that little cafe. You were watching me for 2 months." She smiled. "I told you." Daniel laughed through his tears. Then Margaret whispered, "If you ever miss me, write to me." Daniel looked at her. "What? Write to me?" She paused. "Tell me about your day." Daniel tried to smile. "I'll have nobody to send them to." "You don't need to send them." Those were some of the last words she ever said to him. She died 2 days later. Daniel was holding her hand. And when the doctor quietly said that she was gone, Daniel didn't move. He simply stared at her. For 43 years, he had known where Margaret was. She was in the kitchen, in the garden, in the next room, beside him in bed, across from him at the dinner table. Now she was nowhere. The funeral passed like a dream. People came. They hugged him. They told him they were sorry. They said things people always say when they don't know what else to say. She's in a better place. She lived a beautiful life. She'll always be with you. Daniel thanked everyone. But none of those words could fill the silence waiting for him at home. That first night alone was unbearable. He walked into the kitchen. 2 cups were still sitting in the cupboard. Her favorite sweater was hanging behind the bedroom door. Her book was still lying on the nightstand. Everything looked exactly the same. Except Margaret wasn't there. Daniel sat on the edge of the bed. He looked at the empty side. And for the first time in 43 years, he realized he had no idea what to do next. He didn't sleep that night. The next morning, something unexpected happened. Daniel found an old box in the closet. Inside were photographs, old birthday cards, movie tickets, a dried flower, and dozens of letters Margaret had written to him when they were young. He sat on the floor and read them one by one. Some were funny, some were romantic, some were almost forgotten. One letter was dated 40 years earlier. It said, "If life ever gets difficult, remember that we promised to keep choosing each other." Daniel read that sentence again and again. Then he took out a blank sheet of paper. He sat at the kitchen table. And he began writing. "Dear Margaret, today was a difficult day. I made coffee for 2 people again." He stopped. He stared at the sentence. Then he continued. "I forgot for a moment that you're gone." He folded the paper. He placed it inside an envelope. And wrote her name on the front. Margaret. He didn't mail it. He placed it in the old wooden box. The next Sunday, he wrote another. Then another. And another. At first, he wrote about simple things. The weather. The garden. The neighbors. His grandchildren. A movie he had watched. A meal he had cooked. Sometimes he wrote about how much he missed her. Sometimes he wrote about anger. Sometimes he wrote about fear. Sometimes he simply wrote, "I wish you were here." Months passed. The letters became a ritual. Every Sunday morning, Daniel woke up early. He made coffee. He sat at the kitchen table. And he wrote. His daughter eventually noticed. One afternoon, she asked him about the letters. "Dad, who are you writing to?" Daniel smiled. "Your mother." His daughter looked confused. "But she's gone." "I know." She didn't know what to say. Daniel continued. "I don't write because I think she'll answer." "Then why?" He looked toward the window. "Because I still have things to tell her." His daughter hugged him. And from that day forward, she stopped asking questions. Years passed. The wooden box slowly filled with envelopes. Dozens became hundreds. Each letter carried another piece of Daniel's life. He wrote about birthdays. He wrote about his grandchildren. He wrote about the first Christmas without Margaret. He wrote about the first time he went to the supermarket and instinctively reached for her favorite cereal. He wrote about the day he finally cleaned out her closet. That letter took him 3 hours. He wrote about the pain of throwing away clothes that still smelled like her. He wrote about the things he wished he had said. And the things he was grateful he had said. One letter began, Today I laughed and then felt guilty because you weren't here to laugh with me. Another said, I finally understand what you meant when you told me I would be terrible at living alone. And another simply said, I still look for you when I walk into a room. His family eventually accepted the letters as part of his life. His grandchildren grew up knowing about them. One day, his youngest granddaughter asked him, Grandpa, do you think Grandma can read them? Daniel smiled. I don't know. Then why do you write them? He looked at the little girl. Because love doesn't always need an answer. That sentence stayed with her. Years later, she would remember it. Daniel continued writing. He didn't stop when he became older. He didn't stop when his eyesight began to weaken. He simply wrote larger. Sometimes his handwriting shook. Sometimes he had to stop because his hands hurt. But he kept going. One Sunday morning, more than 10 years after Margaret's death, Daniel opened a new envelope. He wrote the date. Then he wrote, Dear Margaret, today I realized something. I have spent so many years writing to you because I was afraid that if I stopped, I would forget you. But I don't think that's possible anymore. He paused. Outside, rain began tapping against the window. The same kind of rain that had been falling on the morning he first met her. Daniel smiled. Then he continued, I don't remember everything anymore. I forget names. I forget where I put things. Sometimes I walk into a room and don't know why. But I remember you. I remember the cafe. I remember your coffee. I remember the way you laughed when you were trying not to laugh. I remember our first home. I remember our children. I remember your hand in mine. And I remember your last words. You told me to keep living. So I'm trying. He stopped writing. For a long time, he simply sat there. Then he added one final sentence. I think I've finally learned how. He folded the letter, placed it in the box, and closed the lid. That was the last letter Daniel ever wrote. A few months later, his health began to decline. His family stayed close. His grandchildren visited him. His daughter brought him meals. His house became quieter. One afternoon, his granddaughter found him sitting beside the window. She sat next to him. Grandpa. Yes. Do you miss Grandma? Daniel smiled. Every day. Do you think you'll see her again? He looked outside. I hope so. Then he took her hand. But until then, I have all those letters. She smiled. And Daniel leaned back in his chair. He closed his eyes. For the first time in many years, he looked completely peaceful. The wooden box remained on the table. Inside it were hundreds of letters. Letters that had never been mailed. Letters that had never received a reply. But perhaps they didn't need one. Because sometimes grief isn't about forgetting someone. It's about learning how to carry their memory without letting the pain destroy you. Daniel had lost the woman he loved. But he never stopped loving her. He simply found a different way to continue the conversation. And maybe that's what those letters really were. Not messages to the dead. But reminders to the living. Reminders that a person can disappear from your world without disappearing from your heart. That love doesn't always end when someone takes their final breath. Sometimes it changes. Sometimes it becomes a photograph, a song, a familiar smell, an empty chair, a favorite recipe, or a handwritten letter sitting quietly inside an old wooden box. And sometimes, it becomes the reason you keep going. Because somewhere along the way, Daniel understood the promise Margaret had asked him to make. She hadn't asked him to forget her. She hadn't asked him to stop grieving. She had simply asked him to live. And after years of writing to the woman he lost, Daniel finally realized that every letter had been helping him do exactly that. He wasn't writing because he couldn't let her go. He was writing because letting someone go doesn't mean letting go of the love you shared. It means carrying that love forward. Into another morning, another cup of coffee, another rainy day, another generation. And perhaps, somewhere beyond what we can understand, Margaret was never waiting for those letters to arrive. Perhaps she already knew everything they said. Because after 43 years together, there were some things two people no longer needed to say. They simply knew. And that may be the most beautiful part of their story. Daniel lost his wife, but he never lost their love. And every Sunday morning, with a blank sheet of paper in front of him, he found a way to say, I'm still here, I'm still living, and I still remember you.